What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. In today's video, we are going to be continuing our builds that I'm going to be using inside of the final shape besides our prismatic. Of course, these are some of my favorites that, with the changes to exotics as well as the abilities from that dev interview with the sandbox, these are still going to be definitely very viable inside of the final shape, even though some got a little bit of nerfs, like Synthoceps. It goes from 8 seconds down to 5 with that buff, so it's really not that big of a difference in my personal opinion. But we are going to continue with the Titan right here, starting us off actually with a Synthoceps build and the Banner of War Titan. This is a biotic enhancements perk. When you are surrounded, gain increased melee and super damage, as well as improved weapon handling and reload speed. So it's not only for our melee and super to do a bunch of damage, especially with having 3 melees on our stranded Titan, as well as our super mainly being melee damage. This definitely helps a bunch. We get that handling as well as the reload. Now, like I said, the change to Synthoceps, that buff that we are getting with the increased melee and super damage, decreases from 8 seconds to 5 next season, but it really isn't that crazy of a change, like I said. As for the subclass and fragments that I am using on this, as well as the stats that I'm going for, went for 100 in resilience, 100 in recovery, and then as high as I could get in my strength in that particular order for sure. 1, 2, 3, and then after that, totally up to you what your perks and stats can do. Now, as for changes next season, Banner of War is getting a little bit of a nerf in the timer, all the way down to 24 seconds from what it was, but it's only like a little bit of a 6-second nerf, so it's really not that crazy. Plus diminishing returns when using Synthoceps and Worm Gods, but it is still going to be a great combination for sure. Forward offset for a melee, a lunge target point. That's for our Frenzied Blade. So that just means that we're going to be able to hit the target a little bit better. We're not going to slash through the enemy and miss our damage on those melee hits, since we are pairing this with Synthoceps. Abilities for me, we got the Towering Barricade as our first one. Strafe Lift for our second. Frenzied Blade, which got those changes, as our third. Grapple as well, so we can get that nice little bit of melee damage. Banner of War, of course, so we can get that healing as well as increased melee and sword damage. We get that charge by getting defeats, as well as allies can get it as well. So Banner of War still going to be disgusting. Into the fray as well, we are getting a Woven Mail easily with this subclass, and then into the fray, destroying that tangle or casting our super is going to give it to us, but it is getting a little bit of nerf where our melee regeneration is decreased a little bit from what it originally was with this, but I still definitely like having this on this build so we can get that Frenzied Blade back as fast as possible. Quickly over the fragments. First off, we got Thread of Generation for that grenade energy when we deal damage. Next, the Thread of Binding Super Final blows emit a suspending burst from the target. It gives us 10 resilience, and we're using that suspend just for ad management, unstoppable champions. Thread of Mutation, well, we have that Woven Mail. We are going to have the chance to create tangles, so pairs right back into Banner of War and into the fray with Thread of Transmutation. With last but not least, a Thread of Continuity. The Suspend, Unravel, Sever effects to the target's increase in duration. This is pretty good to have on here for that Unravel. Suspend specifically, we are going to get Unravel from our melee as well, and then the Suspend obviously from our super and such, so very good to round us out. Next on the list, we're going to go over the Loreley Flame build, which is Cauterizing Flame as its perk when you are critically wounded with full class ability energy, or when you cast your Barricade, it creates a sunspot at your location that has improved restoration effects. We are going to be using Hammer with this one unless you like the big old hammer, but projectile submissions count only from Soul Invictus. Shrapnel submission damage only without Soul Invictus, so we are going to be using using Soul Invictus in this build, but Hammer got a little bit of buff. Consecration also got a little bit of buff with that damage resistance, as well as increase to PvP damage, which you can also use that if you would like. As for me with this build, for our abilities, aspects, and fragments, Towering Barricade is what I'm going for the barricade. We got Strafe Lift as our jump. I'm going to be using the Bonk Hammer, of course, where we get that little bit of cure when we pick it up. As for our grenade, we're going to go with the Healing Grenade on this for that cure and restoration. As for the stats that I want to go for, first off, I went with Resilience at 100. 2, I went for my Discipline at 100 for that Healing Grenade. And then 3, I went with the Recovery as high as I could get it. Got it up to 70s for that tier. As for aspects, like I said, you could throw on Consecration if you would like, but I like the Soul Invictus with Roaring Flames. Gives us those final blows with the abilities or ignitions, create a good little damage boost for us, stacking up to 3 times. Soul Invictus, of course, like I said, those final blows, Hammer of Soul, impacts, scorched targets, create us that sunspot. When we are in the sunspot, we regenerate our abilities a little bit faster, our super drains more slowly, as well as they scorch targets, and we apply restoration to ourselves. So Soul Invictus, definitely the way to go. As for our fragments, we got Ember of Torches first to make us radiant on those powered melee attacks. Ember of Solace, so that Radiant Restoration has increased duration. That'll come from the sunspots, from our grenade, from our Bonk Hammer, as well as that good old melee that we're getting with torches. Next is the Ember of Searing. Defeating those scorched targets grants melee energy as well as the fire sprites. And last but not least, we are going to be using those solar weapon or abilities to extend the duration of restoration and radiant, plus those fire sprites from before are going to grant us grenade energy, so we're able to have that healing grenade up a lot and basically always have restoration and radiant proc because of Empyrean mixed with Searing mixed with Solace as well as torches. Third build we got for Titan here is the Heart of Inmost Light. We're going to be using this on Void Titan for at least showing you how I build it out for my Void build, but you can really throw on this for any subclass because of its perk Overflowing Light. Using an ability, Grenade, Melee, or Barricade empowers the other 2 abilities. Empowered abilities have faster regen. Melee and Grenade also do more damage, and Barricade has more hit points. So we're going to build this out heavily to get ability spam with the build. So Resilience, Discipline, and Strength are definitely going to be the stats we build into, but we'll cover that in a second. Definitely one of my favorite builds for the PvE realm. Just in general, the Heart of Inmost Light is one of the best exotics for Titan, especially with versatility. Now, when we move on to our abilities, aspects, and fragments, Ward of Dawn will be our super. It did get a little bit of a change with Armor of Light with Void Overshield. It is now additional damage resistance. Allies near the ward now trickle with a Void Overshield. Creates additional orbs on melee attacks near or in the ward, which is kind of cool. But Weapons of Light moved to Helm of Saint 14. We're not just getting it by standing inside of the bubble. As for our abilities, Shield Throw got some nice buff with the max bounce count, a little increase to PvE damage, increase in the tracking effect, as well as the maximum lifetime, a little decrease in the gravity, so you got to throw it a little bit higher, but still going with this as our melee. We got Offensive Bulwark as well with a little bit of changes, but we are still going to be using it. Now only extends Overshield to the maximum, partially regenerates Overshield with each melee kill, so that is also why we are using the Shield Throw, because of the bounces that we're getting, plus the Overshield that the shield is going to give us. As for our grenade, we're going to be using the Vortex Grenade. I personally think that this is one of the best for the PvE realm for sure. Included inside this offensive bulwark, of course, our grenade charges significantly faster when we have that overshield, and we have increased melee range and damage, so that'll pair even more with the throwing shield, but it just extends the overshield when we get those hits now, instead of giving us a little bit of that extra throw. Besides offensive bulwark, which I talked about, we got controlled demo. Of course, hitting targets with volatile abilities or volatile explosions make them volatile, so we're going to have the add clear potential of this build being super crazy with the bounces from that shield, as well as the increased damage from it paired with that offensive bulwark and the increased overshield duration, stuff like that. So very, very good synergy. As for fragments, we got Echo of Starvation right here, picking up Void Breaches or Orbs of Power, Grant us Devour. Very, very good verb for the Void subclass. Second on the list, Echo of Remnants, so that Vortex Grenade is going to linger a little bit longer. Echo of Instability is third, so defeating targets with those grenades are going to grant us volatile rounds, so pairs with Controlled and giving us even more of those volatile explosions, keeping all the odds at bay. And last but certainly not least, melee final blows give us grenade energy, so we can chain our abilities even more with the Heart of Inmost Light and that grenade throwing shield with offensive bulwark controlled demo. It is absolutely disgusting. Next on the list, we're going to be using another solar build for y'all with the Pyrogale Gauntlets. Percussive Flames on this modifies that Burning Maul super into a single high damage slam of the hammer, creates several cyclones of fire. Consecration second slam also creates cyclones of fire, so that little change to consecration getting an increase to ignition damage, and the consistency versus floating combatants is going to be super nice. So this is going to be a good thing for sure to take into that damage phases of things, help you stay alive a little bit with that solar side of things, but Pyrogale is definitely an essential. As for abilities, aspects, and fragments, we are going to go with Towering Barricade, of course, and Strafe Lift, definitely my go-to for the PvE realm. Now, I'm personally going to go with the Throwing Hammer or Bonk Hammer. Still works with Consecration, and if we are in trouble, we can use it to throw, get that cure, etc. So, very nice for that endgame activity. A grenade on this build, I am going with that Healing Grenade. Gives us that cure as well as the restoration, so it is super, super nice for giving everybody a little bit of healing. As for our aspects, Consecration with Roaring Flames here. Those final blows with abilities or ignitions give us increased damage for our abilities, stacking up to ×3. And then pairing that with Consecration and that buff to the ignition damage, as well as those cyclones getting a little bit better tracking, we're going to be able to have some nice big old explosions with this, especially since we have the Throwing Hammer getting us the cure if we need it. We can go right back and do a slide and then a Consecration burst. So with this build on top of the Consecration and the aspects that we are using, I went with the Resilience at 100 being my first stat, the Recovery at 100 being my second, and then a third, the Melee or the Strength stat at 100 as well. So that is what I played into this build with these aspects and such. For my fragments, Ember of Searing, defeating those scorched targets grants us melee energy and creates fire sprites. Fire sprites give us grenade for our healing grenade, and then of course we want as much melee energy we can get back as possible when we do use that Consecration. Second on the list, definitely important, when we pick up those fire sprites, in addition to grenade energy, we're going to get restoration, as well as when we revive an ally, it's going to spread it to both of us. Third on the list, Solar Ignition spreads Scorch to the effective targets. This will be super nice with Consecration because it got more ignition damage, plus it already was very, very, very good with that just by itself. Last but certainly not least, we're going to apply more Scorch stacks so we can get even more of those ignitions because of Consecration and that little bit of buff, plus our other fragment with Char. So very, very good build for that end game. A little bit of damage, a little bit of healing. Very, very nice. Second to last, I went with an Aeon safe build, those nice gauntlets on our Titan and all of our classes really that have the Aeon cult mods. I personally use Sec of Insight. This can go on any subclass you want, so I'm not really going to cover any subclass because it plays literally on any type of build you want. If you want, it can be on a solar build. I can go over it real quickly, I guess, but Sec of Insight, when we do those finishers on elites, we're going to get special ammo for the fire team, as well as finishers on bosses or mini bosses generate heavy. This is super nice. Run in that Pantheon endgame content. Heavy is flowing literally everywhere. Planets is very good to run, especially if you're a plate runner. Get finishers on those big old cabal that are on your plate. You're going to have heavy for your entire team, and if all 4 runners are using it, it is absolutely broken. You're going to have more heavy than you know what to do with. Nothing crazy on this Sunbreaker build that I use with it. Hammer of Soul as our super with the throwing hammer as our melee. We got healing grenade for the grenade because of that cure and restoration to our allies. Roaring flame on this, so we get that nice damage increase to the solar abilities at that stacking to ×3. Soul Invictus, of course, with that solar abilities and such. With our hammer, scorched targets, we're going to be able to create sunspots, which give us our abilities back faster, as well as scorched targets and give us restoration. Fragments, we're going to use those solar ignitions to spread scorch to the affected targets. Radiant and Restoration will also have an increased duration via Ember of Solace right here. Third, we're going to create even more of that Restoration and Radiant because we're going to have it continue via Solar Weapon or Ability Final Blows, giving us both of those solar verbs very often, or have them up consistently, I should say. And last but not least, we're going to apply even more Scorch stacks to targets, just help with the ad clear potential. Plus, if we're creating more Scorch, we can create more ignitions, which spreads some more Scorch, little internal feedback loop, which helps with creating more sunspots and stuff. Then we just use those finishers to create a bunch of ammo for our fellow guardians. And last but certainly not least, we got a Strand Titan build using the Abeyant Leaps, which are those nice boots with the eyes on them with Puppeteer's Control. Drenger's Lash spawns 2 additional projectiles, so we're going to have 3 of them that track targets more aggressively and travel further. We gain Woven Mail as well when we suspend targets, so going to be very easy with this build. Now, not much is changing with the Strand build. Frenzy Blade is getting a little bit of a better target acquisition for lunging, so we don't miss some of those lunges. Banner of War maximum timer is going down a little bit, but we aren't using Syntho or Wormcrest, so the other little nerf doesn't matter for this build. As for abilities and such, Towering Barricade, of course, with the old strafe lift right here for that jump, definitely my go-to. Now, of course, we got that Frenzied Blade. We're going to get that Sever, and then, of course, with that little bit of better target acquisition, we're not going to swipe through those enemies, missing some juicy damage. Of course, on this build, using that Shackle Grenade to pair with the Abeyant Leaps, it's going to help us to get that Woven Mail for that damage resistance. Very good for suspending those unstoppable champions. Plus, we are going to create some tangles with those suspended targets as well. Banner of War is our first aspect. Like I said, maximum timer is going down a little bit, but we are getting that healing as well as increased melee damage from this with that pulses via those melee defeats, and then also just defeats within a certain radius of us and our fellow guardians. Second, for our aspects, we got that Drenger's Lash, so activating our class ability creates the Suspending Ripple. We are getting the extra 2 strands, so we are having 3 of those ripples come out of our shield. Again, suspended targets create tangles, very good against those unstoppable champions. Plus, with the boots, we are getting Woven Mail. As for fragments, first off, we got a Thread of Generation. Dealing damage gives us grenade energy, good to keep up our beautiful Shackle Grenade. Second, Thread of Propagation powered melee grants a strand unraveling rounds, so it is going to be good to be paired with something like the Final Warning or Quicksilver Storm. Third, Super Final Blows emits Suspending Burst, so again, we're using this for those tangles as well as that Woven Mail. Plus Thread of Continuity, so all of that Unravel, Sever, and Suspend effects that we're getting from this build have increased duration, so definitely one of my favorite Strand builds, especially since Banner and the Synthoceps Worm God Crest is getting a little bit nerfed. This is definitely, I think, going to be my go-to, but I know that was a lot of builds that we went over. Hopefully y'all can use some of these in the final shape, and then obviously prismatic is going to be absolutely disgusting and probably what we use for a good majority of the time, but these are also going to be disgusting inside of the final shape, and they're going to just be goated no matter what. So hopefully y'all enjoy the content. We got only a few more days to go before the final shape, so I cannot wait for all the content for y'all. So make sure to hit that bell and subscribe button, as well as slap that bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos here, so you can get those notifications. But again, I appreciate all you guys for coming back to the channel. I'll catch you guys in the new one. Peace.